You know what? I actually wholeheartedly agree with people who will inevitably be in the comments of this video. I mean, if anyone actually watches it. MoP is not Classic. Classic died with Wrath of the Lich King, or it dies with Cataclysm, or basically all the other times it's died over the last 5 years. It really comes down to what you consider the word Classic to actually mean. Well, all the way back in 2009, Blizzard quite clearly already established what they considered it to be. Let's think about that for a minute. 2009. That was Wrath of the Lich King, and people even then was asking for Classic to be a thing, which is pretty wild. But back in 2009, this is what they had to say. Versions of World of Warcraft that existed prior to the launch of Burning Crusade were often referred to as vanilla by the players, but they were actually referred to by Blizzard as Classic, at least as far back as November the 29th, 2009. When Blizzard wrote, "We occasionally see the requests for us to open pre-TBC realms, or classic realms if you'd prefer. Lately there's also been requests for pre-Wrath realms, and I'm sure once the next expansion pack is released, there'll be requests for pre-Cataclysm realms as well. We've answered these requests quite a few times now, saying that we have no plans to open such realms, and this still is the case today." Well, definitely not today. So you can interpret it however you want, whether Classic means before the current expansion, or if it specifically means vanilla. But the cold hard fact is, when Mists of Pandaria visits our computers for the second time, well, I mean third time if you include MoP Remix, it has systems in place which are definitely closer to retail than it is anything we've had in Classic up to this point. Me personally, as someone who loves the era of Classic we're entering and play a hell of a lot of retail as well, I welcome these changes. In fact, I'd like to see Blizzard borrow some of the more successful systems from retail to make MoP even better this time around. So let's have a look at some of the big key systems either introduced or changed, quality of life additions, and other smaller systematic debuts that will change Classic forever. Firstly, it would be stupid not to start with the new class, because not only do we get a new class, we get a new race as well. First of all, the Monk. Probably the thing people remember Mr. Pandaria for the most. The Monk can cover all three roles, being tank, healer and DPS. It's a melee DPS as Windwalker, Brewmaster is the tank spec, and finally Mistweaver is the healing spec. What's unique about the healing spec is it's kind of a melee atonement priest. So obviously as a disc priest using atonement, you're going to be using spells on the mobs that then heal your friends. Well, as a monk, it's the other way round. You'll be hitting the mobs with abilities that's going to heal your friends. Even though fist weaving absolutely is a thing, I would say more so in dungeons, because in raids you're more of a ramp healer. You'll be spreading your renewing mists and then doing big uplifts, which is like an AoE heal to your raid. I don't want to fall too much into a rabbit hole of what Monk is, because that'll be a standalone video on its own where we go over everything you need to know about the class. So be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss that. Alongside the Monk, we're also going to get the Pandas, or the Pandaren. Now, these are factionless when they first start. It's not until you work your way through the starter zone that you will then pick whether you want to be Horde or you want to be Alliance. Now, it's got its own unique starting zone with quite a plot twist at the end of it, which I won't spoil, but if you've played a Panda before, you'll know what I'm talking about. As a Panda, you can be a warrior, a hunter, a rogue, a priest, a shaman, a mage, or a monk. So there's quite a lot of choice when it comes to what class you can be as the new race. In terms of what the benefit of being a Panda is, you get a small CC where you can put an enemy to sleep, you've got inner peace, which means twice as much rested XP, you get double the benefit from food buffs, and aside from the fact that your cooking skills increased, you also get bouncy, so you take less falling damage. Now, playing a Panda won't be for everyone. I personally think, especially as a monk, they're pretty cool. Talents have to be the next big one that you'll notice immediately. This is one of those things that people either love or they hate. Every 15 levels you get to choose between 3 very meaningful talents, which over the course of the expansion you'll likely use all of them at one time or another. The whole point of this was to get rid of pointless talents that just give passive effects and instead bake them into the classes. You can change between your talents very much like you do with glyphs in Wrath and Cataclysm, just by having a reagent and being out of combat. Now, in general, you'll normally find the same across all the classes. Not the same talents, but the same theme of each level bracket. At level 15, it's normally some form of movement talent. At level 30, some sort of healing or survival talent. Level 45 is ordinarily CC. Level 60 will be a really good talent, like some form of cooldown. 75 will be some sort of utility, and then level 90 will always be a big pumper cooldown. My own personal opinion on the talents is I love them at max level, so when you're level 90 and you're raiding or you're doing challenge modes, whatever you're doing, because it's cool on a fight-by-fight basis to just switch between certain abilities. If you need a bit more AoE, you'll take an AoE talent. If you want more single target, obviously a single target talent. And even when it comes to more personal cooldowns, as a monk for example, if it's physical damage, you'll use dampen harm. If it's magic damage, then you'll go for diffuse magic. And again, at level 90, if you want AoE, you might use rushing jade wind, whereas if you want single target, it might be something like Zuen the White Tiger. So it's nice to have those options, but the place it falls down, in my opinion, is when you're leveling, because it just feels so long between each talent point that you just lose that excitement of gaining a level and spending a point. Again, completely irrelevant when you're max level, but it just feels a bit bad when you're waiting 15 levels at a time just to unlock something, especially when you're unlocking, let's say, your CC ability or something like that. Because if you're just out questing, going from level 45 until you hit 60 just to get a stun or just to get a fear or something like that is like, yeah, it can feel a little bit poor at times. There is another good change that they made though alongside the talents, is you no longer need to visit trainers to learn your spells and abilities. They're just auto-trained while you're out and about. Now this is something that I actually really like, because if you're questing away happily and then you know that there's a big ability, for example, Inquisition for a rep paladin, it can kind of ruin your flow having to stop leveling to go and train up. Just my opinion on that. I personally really do like the fact that you don't have to keep going backwards and forwards to train up. The glyph system also sees changes with the removal of prime glyphs, so much like Wrath of the Lich King, you're just now down to major and minor again, and the glyphs are not quite as meaningful or as powerful as they are at the moment in Cataclysm. I'm not saying they're completely useless, but you're not going to see many glyphs that give you silly amounts of damage. It's normally more utility based, like your Divine Storm healing for 5% of your max health, or further reducing damage if you're tanking, but there are a few exceptions where they do actually increase damage, like Mass Exorcism for example, which reduces the range of exorcism to melee range, but causes 25% damage to all enemies within 8 yards of the primary target. Now I could sit and give you examples on all of these, but you know me, I'm going to break all these classes down in a future video where I'll cover all of that anyway. The important thing is, prime glyphs are gone, and the impact that glyphs have in general is obviously nowhere near on par with your talents, for example. And then what about new content? Now, there's no point talking about new raids because that is nothing new. We always get new raids. But the one you'll hear people talk about the most will be challenge modes. Now, challenge modes are the same dungeons as what you'll be doing in MoP, but it doesn't matter if you're doing it on day one or you're doing it 6 months in. The difficulty will always be roughly the same. Now, the reason for that is because your eye level is scaled down. So you're always scaled down to 463 eye level. Now, of course, there will be items that you can get later on in the tiers that even scaled down to 463 are incredibly powerful, but actually I remember some of just the dungeon trinkets that you'll get, as in the heroic dungeon trinkets, being BIS all the way through. There'll be strange BIS lists for challenge modes, which I'm here for. I think that's going to be really, really cool. But the whole point of the challenge mode is to beat the time. So you'll have a bronze time, a silver time, and a gold time. Looking at Temple of the Jade Serpent, for example, if you want to beat it on gold to get the maximum amount of Valor, which, by the way, is a pretty good way to get Valor each week as well, you'll need to do it in 15 minutes. But you can also see what the guild best would be if your guild was actively doing challenge modes, and what the realm best is as well. So you can see 15 minutes is pretty generous when people are doing it in under 8 minutes. Now, I don't actually think gold challenge modes will be a big challenge, not like what people probably remember back in the day, just because we know so much more now. But they certainly are going to be a lot of fun. New content sizes were added as well, which might seem a weird way of wording it, but not only is there actually challenging solo player content introduced to the game in the form of Brawlers Guild and the Proving Grounds, but also smaller group content in the form of normal and heroic scenarios, which they're for groups of 3 players. Instead of fixating exactly when each of these pieces of content should be added to the game, because they aren't something that will be available at launch, or they shouldn't be available at launch at least, what actually are they? Well, Brawlers Guild is in Orgrimmar for the Horde and the Deep Run Tram for the Alliance, and you make your way through the ranks fighting one-on-one with bosses that ramp up in difficulty the higher rank that you get. Extra bosses are also added over time, and while there isn't any real player power rewards like items that you'd use in a raid, it's instead vanity items, titles, and an heirloom, which makes it completely optional. It's not something you have to do, but I can guarantee it's going to be something that everybody wants to do because it's quite fun. It's going to be quite an exclusive club to be part of to begin with, because you do need a blood-soaked invitation. And to begin with, the only way to get one of these invitations will be from another new feature which is the black market auction house. A little bit more on that in a second. The good news is though, once one of your friends gets high enough rank, they'll get a free invite to invite you to the Brawlers Guild as well, so you don't need to spend any gold. The next piece of solo content is Proving Grounds, which should come much later, but they could very well put it in at launch. Now this is where you take on increasingly difficult challenges ranking from bronze up to gold, and then there's one extra difficulty, which is Endless. And Endless is basically just to flex that you're better than everybody else. Now you can do this as tank, healer or DPS, or you can do it as all three if your class allows. This will test your ability to use your toolkit of your selected role, and its initial introduction was to give you a place to improve and just make yourself a better player by really being able to practice on something that's not just a target dummy. But it was quite interesting because they took it a little bit too seriously, and if you remember in Warlords of Draenor, you had to achieve silver just to be able to reach a requirement to be able to queue for random heroics. And then finally, scenarios. Now, scenarios are 3-player instance content, and the first scenario will actually be in the pre-patch, and then it's removed when MoP officially launches and becomes a max level scenario with the rest of them. The best way I would describe these really is short 3-player stories inside an instanced area. You'll do tasks inside these instead of it being like a dungeon where you just cleave through trash to kill bosses. You might have to grab items to progress to the next stage, then maybe blow some stuff up before taking on a boss. They're also completely role-less, so you don't need a tank, healer and a DPS, but arguably, later in the expansion when heroic scenarios are added, there are definitely some that are made easier by putting a bit of thought into what you're taking with you. You can queue for these with randoms or obviously queue as a group, and on completion you'll get a cache with a chance at looting, and later when the heroic scenarios are added, you can get an epic cache from the first heroic scenario completed a day. While we're talking about PvE content, whilst it's not a new concept, world bosses make a return, and MoPs where you can get tier, PvP gear and more from these bosses. You'll have Shah up in Kunlai Summit, Galleon, and later 2 more that are added being Nalak in the Isle of Thunder and Undasta on the Isle of Giants. Not much else to say really, because again, world bosses are not anything new, but they are kind of made relevant again in Mist, so I thought I'd mention it. Another big one really worth mentioning is tanking in general. Now, tanking changes quite a lot in MoP. Most of the tanks now do really good damage, and they're just a lot more fun to play, with a heavy emphasis on active mitigation. So really, the way sort of DK's tank in Cataclysm, all of the tanks perform in a similar way in MoP. You'll see tanks keeping up with healers through self-healing. You'll see tanks keeping up with DPS on trash just because they're doing such mad AoE damage. And honestly, I actually really enjoy tanking in MoP. Where in the other expansions, yes, I tank. I'm even going to be tanking Firelands on my Druid. But quite honestly, tanking as a Brewmaster Monk in MoP is probably one of the most fun things to do. I don't want to go too deep into the tanking, but if you are a tank and that's all you enjoy doing, you're going to love it come MoP. I covered pet battles in a members only video, so if you're a member, thank you. If you're not, consider joining. There's a few MoP videos up now and more to come. But pet battles is basically just think Pokemon, but in WoW. I actually really enjoy pet battles. It's a way to get player experience as well as leveling your pets. So when you're running around, you can level your character and level your pets at the same time, but you're not sort of going out of your way just to level pets because you're also getting player XP. But basically at lower level, you'll be doing 1v1s out in the world, and eventually you'll be using 3 of your pets against 3 of their pets. There's also quests that you can go around to go and beat all the pet tamers, and later on in the game that can actually be a really good source of getting currency that you need to get extra rolls, which you're probably wondering what extra rolls are. So bonus rolls are something that are going to be added as well, where each week you can get 3 coins which you'll be able to use on bosses of your choice. Basically, you've got a chance between getting another item from the boss or getting gold. Now, there's lots of ways to farm the currency. You can farm it simply by killing mobs, but as I mentioned a minute ago, even pet battles is a really good way. The thing that gets added alongside bonus rolls, which is really good, is the fact that you can change your loot specialization. Now, if you play retail, this is nothing new to you, but if, for example, there was a healing weapon that you want, but you're a DPS main and you know you're not going to be able to get that weapon legitimately, like from your actual raid group, then you could put your loot specialization as, let's say, Mistweaver if you was a monk, use a bonus roll, and you'd have a chance at getting that weapon. Now, this is good if there's a boss where you're chasing a specific trinket or a specific item, then every week you can have an extra shot at trying to get that item. The most frustrating thing, though, is when it does pop up that you've got loot and then it's something you've already got. But this is something that carries on through the entire expansion, and it's Elder Charms of Good Fortune that you'll be using to begin with, and then with each new raid that comes, a new currency is introduced, like Mogu Rune of Fate. There's so much more that I want to go over that I'm just going to quick fire a bunch and then call it a day. In Valley of the Four Winds, you'll have your own farm, and this farm will grow over time, and it's not just used for cooking materials. You will have to till the soil, plant the seeds, come back once they've grown, and then obviously pick them once they're ripe. But you can grow anything from portals to capital cities. Yeah, I mean, they're only one-time use, but still, you can get ore, you can get herbs, tailoring and enchanting materials, basically you name it. A lot of people get Spirits of Harmony, which are like the new, I don't know, Ruined Orbs, or probably Chaos Orbs would have been a better example because we're not playing Wrath. But yeah, this is your own little land, and as you build up your reputation with all of the citizens, you actually unlock things like a mailbox, a place to set your hearthstone, and eventually you take over the farm from Farmer Yoon. A fairly basic one is AoE looting. No longer do you need to spam click on loads of mobs, you just press one button and loot it all. Next up, the Black Market Auction House. On the Black Market Auction House, these items are not put on by players, they're put on by the game, or Blizzard, or randomly, however you want to word it. Now, this is the place where you can get the blood-soaked invitation to be able to get access to the Brawlers Guild. Also, you'll be able to get old items for Transmog, which you'll be bidding against players for, of course. People like Briani sells mounts and pets on here, and you can even get level 90 PvE and PvP gear as well. So if there's a particular mount or a particular pet that's been evading you, check the Black Market Auction House. If it's on there, I mean, you might need to spend quite a lot of gold, but you can get some pretty funky things on here. While we're looking at the PvP gear, we might as well talk about the new PvP stats, because they've added a stat called PvP Power. Now, PvP Power increases the damage done to players and their pets or minions, and increases healing done in PvP zones and outdoors. Now, you still have Resilience as well, which is the more defensive stat, which just provides damage reduction against all damage done by players and their pets or minions. And they also added like a base 40% damage reduction in PvP combat. So PvP Power starts to make up for that reduction, and then obviously you're going to get a further reduction with PvP Resilience. Not a lot else to say, just keep an eye out for the new stats. You'll also notice there's no longer a range slot or a relic slot. Hunters will be using bows in their main hand, and things like wands for casters are now considered main hand as well. So you would use a wand in your main hand, and then a regular offhand to go with it. The thing is now, wands are made pretty much in equal power to one-handed weapons, like caster swords, caster daggers, etc. Another minor one is if you like soloing old content and you currently use a macro or something like that to be able to get into the raid on your own, or you invite maybe a friend or an alt, you don't need to do that anymore. You can walk into all old content just purely solo. MoP was also where they introduced a flexible raid system. Unfortunately, without any changes from Blizzard, we won't actually see that until the final patch when Siege of Orgrimmar launches. And the flexible raid system don't work like you may think it does in retail, where, you know, normal and heroic you can just do 10 to 30 people or whatever. This is an actual completely separate difficulty where you get a group together, and it sits sort of between LFR and normal. So a very approachable way to get gear or see the raids for the first time, where it's not with complete randoms, because you'll have to form the group. You can't queue for flex raids. You need to form the group and then you enter a queue together. A really minor one, but the heirloom legs get added in Mr. Pandaria as well, and if you want to get hold of these, you need to get the guild achievement Working Better as a Team, which is to basically max all professions and secondary professions in your guild. Now, there's also a massive legendary quest chain that goes through the entirety of the expansion. The reason I wanted to leave this until last was because, yes, we've not seen anything like it before, but no, I don't want to sit and go into all of the details on exactly every step that you need to do. But the basics of it is, as long as you keep up with each phase, you'll progress through more or less at the same speed as everyone else, because the quests require you to do things like loot items from bosses or gain certain reputation with a Black Prince. And then you work your way through and you get like an extra gem socket, you get a really good meta gem that does really unique things for your role, and of course eventually you'll get a legendary cape, which good luck trying to DPS without the legendary cape if you're in a group with people who have the legendary cape. It almost becomes an absolute requirement, which, like I've said before, does make MoP a little bit ult unfriendly, especially if you wanted to re-roll towards the back end of the expansion. The only other last one I want to mention is the abundance of Bindon Account items that they introduced. Now, up until this point, outside of things like archaeology, where you can get really good Bindon Account items, that's the only way you've been able to get them. In Mists, you can still get them exactly the same way. There's a whole load of new Bindon Account archaeology items that you can get. But also there's treasures in the open world, which give a lot of XP when you find these treasures. Some of them are rarer than others, but they are Bindon Account. Heirlooms in MoP only go up to level 85. You do need to upgrade your existing heirlooms to be able to go to 85, but then there's a bunch of Bindon Account items that you can find out in the world, or even craft. There's even really, really good level 90 crafted Bindon Account items. Well, one really good one that I can think of, which is that. But again, this is just something we hadn't seen until this point, and getting hold of these for when you're leveling alts, obviously, just is going to be fun. It's going to help if you wanted to do Twink BGs or something, I don't know, whatever you want them for. But that's it. I think they're the main major changes. I feel like I've been talking for about 2 hours, and by the time I've chopped this down, it might only end up being about 20 minutes, but this has been a long one. So if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.